I've never been more humiliated in my life. We were sitting in that cold courtroom, the kind that smells like polished wood and judgment. My hands were trembling in my lap, and my son, Crew, was sitting beside me, his little legs not even touching the floor. I had braided his hair that morning, tucked his t-shirt into his jeans, made sure his shoes were clean. I didn't have a lawyer, just truth and the kind of love that keeps you awake every night, doing everything you can to hold your world together. Then Logan's lawyer stood up, Mr. Brackley. The man had a voice like gravel and zero soul behind his eyes. He didn't waste any time. He looked directly at the judge and said, "Your Honor, if you take a look at that child's clothing, you'll see what we're talking about. She can't even afford clean clothes for her kid." I froze. Not because I didn't expect something cruel, I just didn't expect it to be so casual. Like he was talking about the weather, and the judge nodded. Not a big nod. Just enough to send my stomach into my throat. My first instinct was to defend myself, to shout that I worked 3 jobs, that I skipped meals so my son wouldn't have to, that every single dollar went to making sure Crew had shoes without holes and enough food in his lunchbox. But I stayed quiet. I looked at my son. His back was straight. His fingers were fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. He didn't say anything either. Until suddenly, he did. Crew stood up, quietly, no drama, just rose from the bench like he'd decided something inside himself. He held his t-shirt in his little hands, gripping the front of it. He turned to the judge and said, "This is the shirt he's talking about." Everyone turned. The lawyer stopped talking. Even Logan looked up. Crew took a deep breath and said, "My mom worked all night to buy this." I saw her come home at 3 in the morning. She was tired and her feet hurt, but she smiled when she gave it to me. The judge blinked, then looked down at him. Crew stepped forward and held the shirt up. "I wrote something inside it," he said, "so I'd remember what she did." That courtroom, which had felt like a firing squad just seconds before, suddenly went silent. Not the kind of silence that happens when nobody knows what to say, the kind that happens when everybody knows exactly what was just said, and they can't pretend it didn't matter. I watched the bailiff take the shirt from Crew and hand it to the judge. The judge opened it carefully, turned it inside out. His eyes scanned the inside of the collar, and then he read it out loud. People talk about survival like it's something dramatic, like it comes in big moments with loud choices. But for me, survival was quieter than that. It was waking up at 4:45 in the morning and standing in front of the bathroom mirror while my eyes burned. It was flipping burgers from 6 to 10, wiping down gas station counters from noon to 4, then delivering groceries until midnight. I didn't do it for ambition. I did it because I had a little boy named Crew who needed to eat, sleep in a warm bed, and wake up believing that the world was good. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a place that always smelled like someone else's dinner. My mom, Nola, lived with us. She helped when she could, especially with Crew. She's the kind of woman who carries strength, like it's stitched into her bones. When Logan walked out on me 2 years ago, my mom didn't ask questions. She just moved in and started making coffee at 5 a.m. and folding laundry when I came home too tired to lift my arms. I didn't have much, but I had Crew, and I had love. Crew is 7. He has this soft way about him, like he sees things other people miss. One time, I dropped a can of green beans in the grocery store and someone laughed behind me. Crew reached down, picked it up and said, "It's okay, Mom. Sometimes your hands need help." That's just who he is. The night before the custody hearing, I barely slept. Not because I was scared I'd lose. I already felt like I was losing every day, scraping by, running on fumes, doing everything I could to build something stable with nothing but minimum wage and willpower. Logan had a good job, finance. He wore watches that cost more than my rent. When we were married, he liked the idea of being a dad, as long as it didn't interrupt his schedule. He bailed after I caught him messaging a coworker late one night. Said I was too much, said I made him feel small. Then he moved across town, got a lawyer, and decided that part-time parenting didn't suit him anymore. He wanted custody now, full custody. He didn't actually want to raise Crew, he just didn't want to pay child support. I knew that. Everyone knew that, but money makes people look more competent than they really are, and I didn't have money. The courthouse was gray, the walls, the floor, the faces. Crew wore his favorite t-shirt, the one I'd worked extra hours to buy, the one with the soft cotton and the little space rocket on the sleeve. I had stitched the small tear in the side seam by hand. He liked it because it felt lucky. As we walked into the building, I looked down at him. He squeezed my hand and smiled, like he could tell I needed courage more than he did. "I brought the paper," he said. "What paper?" I asked, distracted. "The one I put inside my shirt," he whispered, "in case they don't understand." I didn't ask what he meant. My heart was already tight in my chest. I didn't think I could take any more emotion. My mom waited outside the courtroom doors. She wasn't allowed inside since she wasn't part of the case. She held my shoulder and looked me in the eyes. "You raised him right," she said. "That's the only evidence you'll ever need." Inside the courtroom, everything felt colder. The air, the silence, the way people looked through you instead of at you. Logan was already sitting with his lawyer. He wore a pressed shirt and a tie with little anchors on it. He didn't glance our way. Mr. Brakely, his lawyer, had a pile of folders and a smugness that made my skin itch. I sat down beside Crew, hands clenched in my lap, knees close together. The judge entered. Stern, older, silver-rimmed glasses. Judge Elwood. He looked like the kind of man who didn't miss much, but also didn't hand out sympathy. My name was called. The hearing began, and every cell in my body screamed at me to run, but I didn't. I sat there. I breathed slowly, and I prayed that somehow the truth would be enough. All I had was my son, my story, and the shirt on his back. What I didn't know was that the smallest voice in that room was about to speak the loudest. It started quietly, which somehow made it worse. Mr. Brakely stood and adjusted his suit like he was preparing for a corporate presentation, not a hearing about a child's life. He walked with the confidence of a man who never questioned if the room belonged to him. When he began speaking, his voice was smooth, practiced. He had done this before, and he was about to show everyone that I didn't belong there. "Your Honor," he began, turning to Judge Elwood with a respectful nod. "What we're dealing with here is not just a difference in parenting styles. It's a case of an unstable environment, an overworked single mother unable to meet the basic needs of her child." I felt my hands tense in my lap. My heart thudded faster, but I kept my face calm. Crew sat beside me, swinging his feet gently. I reached over and touched his knee, just to remind him and myself that I was still here. Brakely went on. He talked about income levels, my part-time job record, the small apartment, and how I had moved 3 times in 2 years. He made it sound like chaos, like I had failed to provide a consistent home. But he left out the part where Logan had stopped paying child support for 5 straight months and left us scrambling. Then he pulled out photos, printed copies of images taken from Logan's brief visits. One of Crew wearing his favorite old hoodie with the tear in the sleeve. Another of our living room where the couch doubled as my bed. A third of Crew at school, shirt slightly wrinkled, holding a peanut butter sandwich. "These are not the markers of neglect," I whispered to myself. "These are the signs of a mother trying her best." But Brakely didn't pause. He pointed to the photos as if each one were a courtroom dagger. "Your Honor, this child deserves stability. A home where dinner isn't an unanswered question. Clothes that are new, clean, and properly fitted. And most importantly, a parent who isn't barely surviving." I wanted to stand up. I wanted to shout that I was more than surviving, that my son had never once gone to bed without knowing he was loved, that I chose to work overtime so he could have notebooks for school, not because I was careless, but because I refused to let my struggle become his. But I didn't speak, because something in me said that if I defended myself, it would look like I had something to prove, like they were right. So I sat there, and I let him keep going. He brought up Logan's salary, his stable career, his safe home. He emphasized how Logan had a guest room ready for Crew and had recently started seeing a child therapist to prepare for full custody. That part nearly made me laugh. Logan preparing to be a full-time father by scheduling a few therapy sessions felt like setting a dining table in a house with no walls. It looked nice on paper, but it wasn't real. Judge Elwood listened without interruption. He scribbled notes in the margins of a yellow legal pad. He didn't show any emotion, which made me even more nervous. Then Brakely delivered the final blow. He held up the t-shirt. It was Crew's, the very one he was wearing that day. I didn't know how they got the photo of it, probably from a school drop-off or one of Logan's supervised visits. It was simple, soft gray with a little design near the hem. The collar was a little worn. There was a small stain near the bottom, barely visible unless you were looking for it. "This is what the child is regularly seen wearing in public," Brakely said, his voice full of pity he didn't mean. "Stained, stretched, and clearly overused. If a parent cannot afford clean clothes for their child, how can they be expected to provide emotional and developmental support?" There it was, the accusation that cut deeper than any of the others. Not because it was true, but because it wasn't. I had bought that shirt after working 3 overnight shifts. I had searched for something soft, something warm, something Crew would like. I had skipped groceries that week to get him that shirt. I had folded it gently on his bed the night I brought it home. I had watched him smile and say, "Thanks, Mom, it's perfect." Brakely used it like a weapon. I looked at Judge Elwood. He nodded slightly, processing the statement. He didn't say anything, but that nod made me feel like I had already lost. I didn't cry. Not then. I looked at Crew. His eyes were wide but steady. He hadn't said a word. He was just watching, taking it all in. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to whisper something reassuring. But before I could, he shifted in his seat. He looked at me once, just for a second. Then he stood up, slowly, quietly, and I didn't stop him, because deep down, something told me this moment wasn't mine anymore. Crew stood up with both hands at his sides. His shirt looked too big on him, a little stretched from wear, with the tiny space rocket still faded but visible on the sleeve. He didn't fidget. He didn't ask permission. He just moved. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe to pull him back down to his seat, but nothing came out. My hand reached for his arm, but he was already stepping forward, his shoes making soft sounds on the polished courtroom floor. The judge looked up. So did Brackley. Logan turned in his chair, confused. Crew didn't hesitate. He held up the front of his shirt with both hands and said, clear as day, "This is the shirt they're talking about." The room paused. Nobody spoke, not even the bailiff, who had spent most of the hearing staring blankly into space. "My mom worked all night to get this for me," Crew continued. "She came home when it was still dark out. Her eyes were tired, but she smiled and said she hoped I'd like it. I do." He looked at the judge. Not scared, not angry, just calm, like this was something he had to do. "She makes me dinner every night, even if she's tired. Sometimes it's just rice, but she sits with me while I eat. She helps with my math homework, and even though she doesn't like fractions, she tries anyway." There was a quiet chuckle from the back corner of the courtroom. I didn't turn to see who it came from. My throat was too tight. Crew lifted the bottom of the shirt, careful not to wrinkle it too much. I wrote something inside it, on the inside part near the tag. I did it the night she gave it to me, before bed. He walked up to the bench and held the hem of the shirt out toward the judge. The bailiff stepped in and gently took it from him, glancing at me once, before handing it to Judge Elwood. The judge unfolded it slowly, turning it inside out. There, just above the inside seam, in blue marker, were a few words written in crooked little letters. He squinted at the writing, then his eyebrows lifted slightly. He read it out loud. "My mom is my hero. I don't care if we don't have new stuff. She makes me feel like the richest kid alive." He didn't say another word. He just sat there, staring at the fabric, running his fingers over the edge of the writing. I didn't breathe. My body felt still and heavy, like I had been turned into stone. My hands were shaking in my lap, but I didn't move them. I kept my eyes on Crew, who had walked back to our bench and sat down next to me like nothing unusual had happened. I looked down at him. He looked up at me, not smiling, just waiting. I whispered, "Why didn't you tell me you wrote that?" He shrugged. "It was just for me, but I thought he should see it." The judge folded the shirt back up carefully, smoothing the fabric like it was something fragile. Brakely sat frozen in his chair, not making eye contact with anyone. Logan cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and avoided my gaze. For a long time, no one said anything. I had expected cross-examination, objections, something loud or technical to bring the hearing back into motion, but all the noise had left the room. Then Judge Elwood finally spoke. He set the shirt down in front of him, looked at Crew, then turned to me. "I've sat on this bench for 23 years. I've seen parents with yachts and country club memberships who haven't earned their child's trust the way you clearly have. Sometimes, a piece of fabric says more than testimony ever could. He turned back to Logan's side of the courtroom. I don't doubt Mr. Tierce's financial ability to care for his son, but raising a child isn't about the brand of their shirt. It's about the character you build in them. And your son has just shown this courtroom exactly where that character comes from. I gripped the edge of the bench so hard I thought the wood might splinter in my hand. But still, I said nothing. I didn't need to. Judge Elwood looked at the clerk, gave a single nod, and then turned back to us. I'd like to take a short recess before I give my ruling, but I want to be clear. What I've just witnessed here is not only rare, it's deeply moving. This child is grounded, honest, observant, and above all, secure in the love he receives. He paused, looked directly at me, and said, "That's not something money can buy." With that, he stood up and left the bench. The bailiff called for a 15-minute recess. The courtroom emptied slowly, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Crew leaned against me, his head resting on my side. I placed my hand on his back and finally exhaled. In that moment, I wasn't just his mother. I was his witness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. 15 minutes never felt so long. I stayed seated on the bench, my hand gently rubbing Crew's back while he leaned against me like he always did when he needed reassurance. But today, it felt like he was giving it, not asking for it. Logan didn't speak to anyone. He stood by the window with his back turned to the courtroom. Mr. Brakely shuffled his papers, avoiding eye contact. My palms were still damp. I kept replaying Crew's words in my head. That moment, his courage, the stillness in the room afterward. Everything felt suspended, like the air had thickened. The door opened. Judge Elwood stepped back inside, his face unreadable. He took his seat behind the bench and placed the folded t-shirt beside his notepad. He looked at both sides before speaking. "Before I make my ruling," he began, "I want to make something clear. Custody decisions are never easy. They require balancing stability, financial responsibility, emotional development, and the overall well-being of the child involved." He paused and looked directly at Logan. "Mr. Tierce, you have shown that you are capable of providing a home. You have the resources, the means, and, on the surface, the infrastructure that many courts would look at favorably." Logan gave a small nod, his jaw tight. The judge then turned to me. "Miss Carter, your situation is more challenging. You work multiple jobs, your income is modest, and your living conditions are far from ideal. And yet," he paused, lifting the shirt gently and unfolding it again. "This child didn't just show us what he wears. He showed us how he sees the world, and more importantly, how he sees his mother." He turned it around again so the words were visible, then set it down. "I have heard countless testimonies from parents claiming to love their children. Today I saw love proven by action, by sacrifice, and most powerfully, by the words of a child who has nothing to gain by lying." Crew looked up at me. I gave his knee a soft squeeze. The judge's voice remained steady, but something in it had changed. It was fuller, warmer, like the edge had softened. "I've seen homes with every material luxury fail a child emotionally. And I've seen homes like yours, Miss Carter, where a child's self-worth is rooted so deeply that no amount of pressure or persuasion can shake it." He leaned forward slightly. "Because of that, I'm awarding primary custody to Ms. Carter, full legal and physical custody. Mr. Tierce, you will be granted scheduled visitation, but all transitions will take place under supervision until further review." Logan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He sat down slowly, his face pale. Mr. Brakely blinked hard like he had just been slapped, then lowered his head and started stacking his papers without a word. I didn't move. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. My eyes were locked on the judge, trying to make sure I heard him right. I looked down at Crew, and he was smiling. Not a big, toothy grin. Just a quiet smile that said he already knew this would happen. He never doubted it. The judge stood and prepared to leave the bench, but before he did, he turned to Crew. "Young man, I don't usually speak to children during hearings, but I want to say something to you." Crew sat up straighter, his eyes wide. "You reminded everyone here today what really matters. What you said took strength, and that strength didn't come from a shirt or a speech. It came from how you've been raised." Crew nodded once, like he understood. Judge Elwood gave him a small smile, then turned to me. "Miss Carter, I hope you find some rest. You've earned it." He banged the gavel once and exited the courtroom. I sat there for a long moment, still processing it. The tension in my shoulders began to melt and my throat finally loosened. I leaned down and kissed the top of Crew's head. "We did it, baby," I whispered. "We really did." He leaned into me and whispered back, "I knew you'd win." I laughed softly. Number U won that for me. As we gathered our things, Logan walked past without saying a word. I didn't look back. There was no need. Outside the courtroom, my mom was waiting, her eyes scanning my face the second we stepped into the hallway. She didn't ask. She just pulled us both into a hug and whispered, "I knew they'd see it." I clutched Crew's hand in one and held my mom's hand in the other. We walked out into the afternoon light, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we weren't just surviving anymore. We were standing on something solid, something earned. The courtroom couldn't see our dinners together, our laughter, our late-night stories, the silly songs during bath time, but they saw Crew. They saw the love. That was enough. That day, everything changed. Not because of me, but because a 7-year-old boy decided the truth mattered more than fear. That night, after the hearing, I sat on the edge of my bed while Crew played with his toys on the floor. He didn't seem changed by what had happened. He was still the same boy with chipped dinosaur figures and a stack of library books by the wall. But I was different. For the first time in years, I wasn't preparing for a fight. I wasn't checking bank balances, searching for extra hours, or bracing myself for another letter from Logan's lawyer. I was still tired, but it wasn't the kind of tired that came from fear. It was just the kind that follows release, like my body finally believed it could rest. Crew looked up and said, "Mom, do we have to go back to court tomorrow?" "No," I smiled. "We're home now." He nodded like that made sense, then returned to lining up his little plastic animals. The next morning, I made pancakes, real ones, not the instant kind. I even let Crew pour the syrup himself, which turned into a bit of a mess, but I didn't mind cleaning it up. He earned that breakfast. Later that week, a social worker called to follow up. She had reviewed the transcripts from the hearing and asked if I wanted help finding more stable housing. I said yes, not because I was embarrassed by our apartment, but because I finally had the emotional space to build something better. My mom stayed with us a while longer, even after things settled. She still woke up early and folded laundry when I was at work, but she started going on walks in the evening. She smiled more, too. I think she had been holding her breath right alongside me. People talk about justice like it's something rare, a flicker of light in a dark place. That day in court, I saw it clearly. It didn't come from a lawyer, it didn't come from facts printed on paper. It came from a child who saw the truth and believed it was worth saying out loud. Crew didn't understand the legal impact of what he did. He wasn't trying to win. He just knew the way they were talking about me wasn't right, and he wanted someone to know that. A few months after the hearing, Crew came home with a blue ribbon from school. He had written a short story for a classroom contest. The story was about a knight who protected a kingdom with nothing but a wooden shield and a big heart. The last line said, "He didn't have gold, but he had love," and that made him strong. His teacher asked me to come in and read it to the class. I barely made it through the ending. One of the parents asked afterward if I was a writer. I said, "No, I'm just a mom. But maybe being a mom is the greatest story I'll ever tell." Things aren't perfect now, but they're stable. I work 2 jobs instead of 3. Crew has a desk for his homework. We go to the park on Sundays, and every night we sit at the kitchen table and talk about our day. He still wears that space rocket shirt sometimes. I haven't washed the inside collar where the words are written. I want them to stay there, exactly as they are. When people ask me how I made it through everything, I tell them the truth. I didn't. He did. A little boy in a secondhand t-shirt stood up when I couldn't, spoke when I stayed quiet, and reminded everyone in that courtroom of something they had forgotten. That love is not loud, and strength is not flashy. Sometimes it's just a hand holding yours in a moment when you feel invisible. That's what I carry with me now. Not the pain, not the struggle, but the memory of my son's voice echoing across that silent room, the way it reached places I couldn't, the way it saved us. We didn't win because of money or perfect timing or polished words. We won because the truth, spoken from the heart, can still change the world. And sometimes it only takes a child to remind us of that. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone who's doing their best with what they have, please share it. You never know who might need to hear that love, not money, is what truly builds a home. Leave a comment below. Tell me what this story made you feel. I read every one of them, and your words matter more than you know. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We share real stories here. Stories that hurt, stories that heal, stories that show what quiet strength really looks like. Like the video if it moved you. Share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truth.